All right, hi everybody. I think we can get started now. I'm going to pass it over to Eric to start us off.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar from Mobilize to Manage Decarb Strategies for Existing Buildings. My name is Eric Burnside, and I'm an architect in K through 12 education here in Chicago. Today's program was put on by the Illinois Green Alliance Programs Committee, a volunteer group that coordinates educational events covering a wide range of topics throughout the year for the green building industry. The team that organized today's events consists of Mohammed Haider, Mohammed Haider and Dylan Prenger and myself. You all have been muted upon entry, so please type any questions you have throughout the session into the Q&A, and we will get them answered at the end. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent out in a follow-up email. For those who are unfamiliar, Illinois Green Alliance is a membership-driven nonprofit organization that advances green buildings and sustainable communities for all. Our 5-year strategic plan pushes the green building industry to meet or get on the path to net zero. We achieve this work through educational events like panels and building tours, by engaging communities and partnering with organizations across Illinois, and by advocating for new policies and legislation. So check out our website, illinoisgreenalliance.org, to view recordings of our past webinars, see upcoming events, learn more about membership, and find ways to get involved. This webinar is approved through the AIA for one learning unit and can be logged for one LEED AP or Green Associate continuing education hour. To request AIA continuing education credit, or a personalized certificate of completion for the architecture license continuing education reporting process, you can use the QR code on your screen and complete the linked form. We'll also be linking the form in the chat now and at the end of the session. For those interested in self-reporting continuing education hours for your LEED AP or LEED Green Associate credentials, we will be sharing self-reporting instructions and a fillable certificate of completion in our follow-up email to all attendees next week. Here are today's learning objectives. We'll be explaining the environmental and financial and regulatory drivers for decarbonizing the built environment, differentiate between key sustainability concepts, including embodied versus operational carbon, and carbon neutrality versus net zero, assessing the role of green building certifications in driving carbon reduction and occupant wellness goals, and apply the 5M decarbonization framework to systematically develop and manage low carbon strategies for existing buildings. I also want to take a moment to recognize Illinois Green Alliance's sustaining sponsors who make our work possible. A special thank you to our gold level sponsors, ComEd, USGBC, and Sloan. Make a commitment to advancing green buildings and communities across the state by visiting illinoisgreenalliance.org/sponsorship to start a conversation about sponsorship partnership today. And now on to our presentation. Our panel today will be addressing the problem of decarbonization of existing buildings, particularly at the portfolio scale. New buildings, of course, are ripe opportunities to design smarter and greener with the latest technologies, materials, and practices, but it is hardly imaginable that everything new will replace and remediate everything that is existing. Existing buildings embody the carbon debt we are pulling forward into the future, and without replicable strategies to deal with these buildings as well, they will continue to emit and pollute, potentially as a larger share of the built environment than our new buildings. First, we'll be hearing from Samaya Theron, founder of Avant-Garde Sustainable Solutions. Samaya is an award-winning sustainability leader with 20 plus years of global impact in decarbonization, green building certifications, and policy advocacy. She has been recognized as CRREM Chicago's 2024 Business Notable Leader in Sustainability and the 2023 GBI Advocacy Ambassador Award winner. She will set the stage for current discourse on decarbonization and the urgency we need to address this crisis. Then we'll hear from Satish Ravindran. He will be presenting the 5M decarbonization framework developed at UL Solution as one tested way to organize and digest this complex problem. Satish is an energy and sustainability specialist and an operations manager at UL with 15 years of experience in developing sustainable strategies for client portfolios. He's also an ASHRAE certified decarbonization professional, a PE from the state of Texas, and a lead AP. He advises and supports asset management teams in identifying, scoping, and implementing energy and decarbonization improvements. Satish performs sustainability assessments, supporting clients with their transition to low carbon, sustainable future models. And then at the end of our session, we'll hear from Illinois Green Alliance's Deputy Director, Katie Kolisny, who will be sharing about the Building Energy Hub's Building Performance Planning Guide, which is another actionable decarbonization tool. To wrap up, we'll have the audience Q&A led by myself, and remember to add your questions to the Q&A function throughout the program so that our speakers can address them at the end. So now I'm going to pass things over to Samaya to get us started.
Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen quickly. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep,
okay.
Looks good.
Thank you, Twyla. Hello, everyone. I'm Sumaya Theron. I'm really excited to be here. Today, we're going to be talking about how we can shape a low-carbon future through sustainability and decarbonization in the built environment. Decarbonization is no longer no longer optional. It's a critical strategy for our industry, our climate, and our communities. Over the next hour or so, both Satish and I will explore what that means and how we can act. There are 5 main social determinants of health according to Healthy People 2030. Neighborhood and the built environment is one of them. When we address sustainability, we also address equity and quality of life. Green building can improve air quality, access to daylight, thermal comfort, and more. We do spend the majority of our lives indoor, and all these are vital to the human health because our buildings do not exist in isolation. They do impact the quality of life, outcomes, and risks. Buildings need to decarbonize to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, mitigate climate change, and improve health and well-being. We need to act for climate, and also we need to act for health. It's an economic, environmental, and regulatory necessity. Acting on that reduces carbon footprint, mitigates climate change, lowers energy costs, and enhances property value. It keeps us up to date with the increasing policies and mandates like green building certifications and building performance standards. It also impacts the health and comfort. Green buildings improve indoor air quality and occupants' well-being. So what does it really mean when we say we need to decarbonize building? Decarbonization is defined as the process of reducing carbon emission from buildings, both operational and embodied. Embodied carbon refers to CO2 emitted during the manufacture, transport, and construction of building materials, plus end-of-life emissions. While significant progress has been made to understand how to reduce operational emissions, our industry is getting more and more successful at making efficient buildings. There is still a gap in our knowledge and effort toward reducing embodied emissions. Unlike operational carbon, which can be reduced over time with energy-efficient renovation and the use of renewable energies, embodied carbon emissions are locked in place as soon as the space is built. Embodied carbon will be responsible for almost half of total new construction emissions between now and 2050, according to Architecture 2030. We need to get a grip on the embodied carbon now if we want to meet the climate targets by the year 2050. Embodied carbon reduction can often reduce material use and project costs, reduce energy consumption in raw material extraction, manufacturing, and transportation, help to meet green building certification requirements, and better position building owners for future code or policy changes that incentivizes or require low embodied carbon. An example on embodied carbon and high impact material could be like the three materials that have high impact are concrete, steel, and aluminum. They're responsible for 23% of global emissions. Most of it is used in the built environment. Here we have an example of different options where we can select different types of insulation that can also impact the embodied carbon of the project. So we can do that through policy design, material selection, and specification. We can guide the built environment to have lower embodied carbon. Now that we explored what embodied and operational carbon are, let's talk about how we must act urgently and strategically. And why are we talking about this in the first place? Why do we need to call for this action? Buildings account for almost 40% of global CO2 emissions. That's a huge percentage. We can't meet climate goals without drastically improving how we build and operate our spaces. Here in Chicago, buildings account for 70% of our greenhouse gas emissions. Nationwide, energy use is the biggest contributor. If we're serious about net zero, buildings must be the focus. In 2015, estimated of 80% of existing building stock will be buildings that were constructed in 2025 or earlier. That means we can't rely on new construction alone. Retrofitting existing building is urgent and is an opportunity for innovation. We're expecting to have the floor area of global buildings to be doubled by 2060. So we need really to focus on existing building. So in order to manage carbon, we need first to understand what that means. Here are some important terminology that I will leave up on the screen. We have, the definition of decarbonization, what is carbon neutral, zero emission, net zero emission, and carbon sequestration. So globally, we're seeing a momentum toward net zero commitment. Decarbonization refers to the process of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, particularly carbon dioxide, in order to mitigate the impact of climate change. This can be achieved by reducing emissions from various sources, such as electricity generation, transportation, and industry, using renewable energy, energy efficiency, and carbon capture and storage technologies. Net zero, on the other hand, refers to achieving a balance between greenhouse gas emissions and removal. This means that any remaining emissions are offset by removing an equivalent amount of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, such as through reforestation or direct air capture technologies. Net zero can be achieved through a combination of emission reductions and carbon removal. In other words, decarbonization is the process of reducing emissions, while net zero is the goal of balancing emissions and removals. Achieving net zero requires more than just reducing emissions. It also involves removing carbon from the atmosphere to offset any remaining emissions. Cities and states are implementing progressive codes. For example, Boston, Denver, Ithaca, California, each is pushing performance standards. Chicago is moving too, but we must stay ambitious. Decarbonization isn't just good for the planet, it's also good for business. We can reduce energy use, which means lower operational costs, attract tenants, investors, and buyers who value sustainability, future-proof assets against regulatory risks and carbon taxes, penalties, and fines, and it provides us access to green financing and incentives. So speaking of momentum, let's look at the big picture. What are global leaders committed to, and what does this mean for us? The World Economic Forum has net zero milestones. By 2050, we need to have more than 85% of buildings that are carbon ready. More than 90% of heavy industrial production is low emissions, and almost 70% of electricity generation globally is from PV and wind. Under the 2015 Paris Agreement, nearly 200 countries said that they would act to limit the rise in global average temperatures to well below 2 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial times, and strive to keep it at a ceiling of 1.5. So why does net zero emissions matter? It might not be the latest buzzword in the world of climate action, but it's key to keeping us safe from harm. The United Nations Climate Science Panel has said that man-made carbon dioxide emissions need to fall by about 45% by 2030 from the 2010 levels. and reach a net zero by mid-century to give the world a good chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees and avoiding the worst impact of climate change. We have already heated up to 1.1 degrees, and we are currently on track for warming of at least 3 degrees this century as emissions continue to rise. Scientists say that would bring ever worsening extreme weather and potentially catastrophic sea level rise, making some parts of the planet uninhabitable or fueling hunger and migration. That and mounting public pressure is why a growing number of countries, companies, and others are promising to cut their planet warming emissions to net zero by 2050 or before. On this slide, we can see the annual CO2 emissions savings in the net zero pathway 2030 and 2050 relative to 2020. Clean energy innovation must accelerate rapidly, with government putting R&D, demonstration, and deployment at the core of energy and climate policy. Thus, the government spending needs to be increased and reprioritized. Critical areas such as electrification, hydrogen, bioengineering, and carbon capture utilization and storage today receives only around 1/3 of the level of public R&D funding of the more established low carbon electricity generation and energy efficiency technologies. Support is also needed to accelerate the rollout of demonstration projects, to leverage private investment in R&D, and to boost overall deployment levels to help reduce cost. Around $90 billion of public money needs to be mobilized globally as soon as possible to complete a portfolio of demonstration projects before 2030. Currently, only roughly $25 billion are budgeted for that period. Developing and deploying these technologies would create major new industries as well as commercial and employment opportunities. Energy transition have to take account the social and economical impact on individuals and communities and treat people as active participants. The transition to net zero brings a substantial new opportunity for employment, with 14 million jobs created by 2030 in our pathway, thanks to new activities and investment in clean energy. Spending on more efficient appliances, electric and fuel cell vehicles, and building retrofits and energy efficient construction would require a further 16 million workers. But these opportunities are often in different locations, skill sets, and sectors than the jobs that will be lost as fossil fuel declines. In our pathway, around 5 million jobs are lost. Most of those jobs are located close to fossil fuel resources. And many are well paid, meaning structural changes can cause shocks for communities with impact that persist over time. This requires careful policy attention to address the employment losses. It will be vital to minimize hardships associated with these disruptions, such as by retraining workers, locating new clean energy facilities in heavily affected areas wherever possible, and providing regional aid. We can see here across the nation what the decarbonization process is for progressive building performances in different states. Governments are pushing for faster decarbonization. We have New York City Local Law 97, for example, different building performance standards, net zero commitments across the nation. Illinois has made progress in reducing carbon intensity by 20%, and that's looking at the timeline from the year 2000 to 2020, but we still rank the 10th in the nation for carbon-heavy electricity. This highlights the need for clean grid strategies and electrification. I'm not sure if everyone had a chance to look at the news recently. For April 2025, there was a power outage in Spain and Portugal, and it was blamed on the grid instability. This recent blackout is a wake-up call for all of us. As we electrify everything from cars to buildings, we also need to focus on resilience. Sustainable buildings must be low carbon and grid smart as well. We need reliable power. Investing in storage and batteries is really important. There are key strategies for decarbonizing building, which are energy efficiency, renewable energy, grid integration, building electrification, tackling embodied carbon, and always stakeholder engagement. Every project needs a tailored approach, but the path is clear. A question we often get is where to start. The low-hanging fruits are usually energy efficiency first. Reduce your energy use through retrofits and smart technologies. Replace gas systems with heat pumps and renewable energy sources, and provide some kind of renewable energy on site and some sort of storage for resiliency. Embodied carbon reduction would be through selecting materials that are low carbon and focusing on circular design. But the question again is how and where to start. How do we create a roadmap to decarbonize our projects? The advice usually is do not reinvent the wheel. Use an existing framework that best suits your project. That is where green building certifications can really help. We have so many green building certifications out there. Green certification can act as a roadmap for carbon reduction by providing a framework and standards for organizations to assess, reduce, and offset their emissions, ultimately leading to a more sustainable and environmentally responsible business model. They help businesses understand their current carbon footprint, set goals for reduction, and implement strategies like energy efficiency, renewable energy, and carbon offsets. A framework helps us measure, improve, and verify our progress. I have worked with several green building certifications. One of my recent favorites is the new tool from the GBI. Their Green Globe's Journey to Net Zero certification advances decarbonization in the global built environment by empowering all commercial real estate owners to evaluate performance and implement impactful change. It turns complexity into action. I use this with clients to guide real results. This is a two-in-one certification. There is the Journey to Net Zero Energy, which tracks and reduces buildings' energy consumption through comprehensive EUI measurement system, achieve a balance between the energy consumed and the energy generated from low to zero emission sources like solar, hydro, geothermal, and wind. And the Journey to Net Zero Carbon, which tracks and reduces your buildings' carbon emissions and transform your buildings' environmental impact, reduce greenhouse gas emission, by leveraging low to zero emissions energy sources and life cycle thinking. When you select a green building certification, you need to choose the best certification for the project type and needs. Again, each project will depend really on who your client is, where the fund is coming from, what is really the need to get that specific certification, and then based on that, you can select the best fit for the project type. Regardless of what certification you choose, most of them offer the following: assessment and measurement through carbon footprint analysis and greenhouse gas emissions in inventory to track and report on greenhouse gas emissions, which is a crucial first step in setting reduction goals. Goal setting and action planning, which you can set decarbonization targets and identify an action plan. Then the next step would be implementation and monitoring. Implement energy efficient practices such as upgrading equipment, improving building design, and adopting smart technologies. All promote the use of renewable energy sources, carbon offset certifications, which allow organizations to offset remaining emissions through the purchase of carbon credits from projects that reduce or sequester greenhouse gases. The last step would be verification and reports. Green certification often involve third-party verification to ensure that organizations are meeting their commitments and making genuine emission reductions, fostering transparency and accountability through public reporting on progress. So my final thoughts on that before I pass it on to Satish is low carbon buildings are the future. Decarbonization is not just a climate responsibility, it's a business opportunity. Green certification provides a structural approach, again, regardless of which green building certification you end up choosing. I truly believe we can create a better, healthier future, one building at a time. If you need help creating a roadmap or choosing the right certification, I would be more than happy to support you. A good structured approach for existing buildings has been developed by UL. My colleague Satish will introduce their 5M decarbonization framework shortly. And if you'd like to stay in touch or collaborate, here are my contact information, and let's keep the important conversation going. Thank you.
Satish, are you there? Can you share your screen?
Yes. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect.
Sorry,
Satish,
I don't
we
see
see
your
you,
slides.
we see you, but not your screen.
You're not able to see my screen?
No, you haven't shared yet.
Give me 1 sec.
That's better.
About now?
Yep.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Sumaya, for laying the background for why decarbonization is much needed in today's world. Again, my name is Satish Ravindran. Very pleased to present this with partnership with the Illinois Green Alliance. To continue the decarbonization topic further, I wanted to kind of show you a best practice actionable framework that helps with building owners, developers and professionals. Now, the 5M decarbonization framework consists of 5 steps. And just to give you some context as to why it is important, many of the stuff that Sumaya pointed out earlier, we are seeing a continuing trend in existing buildings that major renovations begin outpacing new construction within the architectural construction industry by 2022. What does it mean? It means that more people are moving from constructing new buildings to improving their existing building stock. United Nations also reported that buildings account for 39% of global emissions. So if you look at it, 11% comes from materials and construction, 28% comes from operations. So this means that it's not just necessary to construct a new building, go with new codes and technologies, but you also have to take into account how your existing building portfolio is performing. And Sumaya also pointed out this earlier, that 80% of the building stock is going to remain standing after 2050. So, more power to decarbonization. So as we dive deeper into decarbonization, there are complex questions for the built environment. And these are for two set of separate groups of stakeholders. One is the operator and the second is the investor. The operators are trying to understand the day-to-day performance of the building. So they are trying to identify what kind of hotspots and the emissions, where are they coming from? And how do they develop a business case for the higher up? When they are presenting to their higher management, how do they develop a roadmap for their property? Now, the investors are looking at this in a different angle. They have a portfolio of assets. They are trying to understand which of the assets are at a risk of getting stranded, which means, whether it's the physical impact of climate change, whether it's a transitional impact, whether it's a regulatory impact, they're trying to understand which of these properties do they need to tackle first. And that's where I think a clear framework would help, because one, it provides clarity around aligning the stakeholders together. It helps ensure alignment along certifications and ordinances, and it also helps strategic planning. So you have an asset in mind, you have a property in mind. What kind of measures do you have to implement, and when do you have to implement them? And finally, it also gives the confidence in an investor because it's all data driven. So these are the actual 5 steps that I have. The first step is Mobilize, which is establishing the scope for decarbonization. The second thing is measure. So how do you actually measure where your current building stock is? What is the baseline emissions? Where are the emissions coming from? And then how do you model the measure? So how do you chart the path towards actionable plan? And then finally, how do you keep track of your progress? How do you know whether the impacts that you have created are actually taking effect? And finally, how do you manage this portfolio? How do you institutionalize your improvements for the longer term? Now, the first step is laying the foundation, which is basically getting all the stakeholders together and knowing why you should decarbonize. Why are you doing it? Whether are you doing it for regulations? Are you doing it for ROI standpoint? Are you doing it for LEED? So you need to understand exactly what the goal of decarbonization is. And then you also need to engage the right people so that you don't have roadblocks further down the line for budget or stuff like that. And you also need to look at regulations, what kind of territory you are in, whether your building is located in New York or California, what kind of regulations apply there. The second step is measure. This is where an energy assessment or energy audit would really help. It is talking to your building operators, looking at the existing operation of the buildings and looking at the current baseline of the building. So this is where an end use really helps, because you need to break down your end use of where your energy is going. And then you also need to identify energy conservation and carbon measures. And once you have this in place, you can also go to your Energy Star portfolio manager and start benchmarking your building, kind of know where your current energy use intensity is coming from. The third step in this process is model, which is where a decarbonization tool will help, because modeling is all about turning your data into strategy. So this is where a modeling tool helps in kind of pinpointing what kind of actionable steps can you take and when do you take it. So for example, if you have a boiler today and you want to convert it to electric boilers, you need to know exactly when do you make that conversion and how that looks like in your 2050 trajectory. And that is where using a decarbonization tool really helps, because it helps you prioritize your ECCM measures. It kind of gives you a timeline for implementation, and also it provides a business case for quantifying your ROI numbers. So as I said, we use a decarbonization tool, but there are plenty out there in terms of what they provide and what kind of robustness they provide. But overall, all decarb tools should be able to achieve the following. One is give you an accurate carbon emissions for your property or for a portfolio, and whether it is with the impact of measures and without the impact of measures. So you should be able to compare how your building looks like on a 2050 trajectory. Then the decarb tool should also help you get the assets all the way to net zero by early retirement of old equipment. So what that means is that if you have an old equipment standing today and it is a very critical piece of equipment, let's say you are going to a pharma company and you have an old dryer, huge industrial dryer sitting there, and people are wondering whether, when it would break down. Do you have to replace it at this year, or do you have to replace it in 2030 because it is so critical to your operations? That is when a decarb tool would help you. Finally, a decarb tool also helps you towards ordinances. So as you see here, it also helps provide comparison to your CRREM pathway. CRREM stands for Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor. It is a pathway that's developed for real estate portfolios. You have SBTI pathways. You could do any pathways that you model, and you have to measure your building against those frameworks. Step 4 is monitoring. And this is where real-time tracking of your building through energy information system comes into play. So there are plenty of energy information systems out there that are third-party provided, but all of them should be able to help you monitor your utilities on a day-to-day basis, whether it's natural gas or electricity or water. And then it should be able to tell you if any issue or spike happens in your day-to-day usage. And it should also be able to tell you how your property is performing on a monthly basis, on an annual basis as well. We also recommend verification, which is basically doing a monitoring-based commissioning of your energy information system. So what that means is that you need a third party to come in and verify if your actual information system is working well, if the dashboard is connected to everything, if your building automation system is actually tied to your overall energy information system. And it also helps you adjust your strategies dynamically. So one thing I want to point out is using Energy Star. And again, it's a shame that this program might be scrapped off, but hopefully it stays, because I have found it so useful for so many property managers and building owners when we are recommending this kind of a roadmap. Basically for the reason that a lot of ordinances are driven by Energy Star, whether it's your local city or state level ordinances, require performance standards through Energy Star tracking. And then Energy Star certification by itself is so powerful because it gives you the marketing rights for your building, it gives you that stickers. And then a lot of tenants are looking at Energy Star, and they look at leased properties, and they look at specific requirements with respect to Energy Star. And then if you have any internal company goals, then that's also driven by Energy Star. So this is really the place where you can look at your building on a day-to-day basis. The final step on this is manage. And manage meaning, how do you manage your building on a long term? How do you make sure you institutionalize your best practices across the period? And then this is also about managing your portfolio for LEED or for any other regulations, whether it's GRESB, whatever reporting is required, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, how much does it renew? How do you overall manage a property? That's the final step of your framework. So I wanted to kind of give you an example of a couple of examples of how we have applied to this framework. The first was with a pharma manufacturer who had about 5 buildings in their portfolio in the US. And I'm going to focus this on one of the properties in Michigan. And so it's not an end-to-end, all the 5 frameworks that I discussed, but they came to us already having completed the mobilization phase, which meant like they had already met with the stakeholders. They knew what the goals were. But they came to us as the first step as solution validation, which meant that out of the 50 or so solutions they had identified for their property, they wanted us to kind of validate which were the most important solutions. And this was done by site assessment. Then they wanted us to do a viability review for each solution, and then do an impact ranking for the measure in terms of carbon, in terms of payback, and in terms of budget. And then we had to do a business case for the solution. So pointing out the direct benefits and indirect benefits. And finally, they wanted a roadmap created. So these were the list of 50 solutions that they had already got from their stakeholders, from their day-to-day engineers, operators, and whoever were in their in their factories. They had come up with a list of the top solutions that they would like to change, they would like to propose. So whether it's their boilers, whether it's their air compressors, whether it's like walk-in cooler, they have got so much of industrial equipment. And so where we came in is we went on site to that Michigan plant, and they have 6 or 7 buildings inside that campus. And we took a look at each and every piece of equipment and to decide, okay, how does the end use look like? Where does the maximum amount of electricity or natural gas goes to? And then what we did was, after drawing up the baseline, we did the model phase, which is basically how do we convert these numbers in terms of carbon? And also, how do we sit with the stakeholders to understand how a solution might be suitable for them? So for example, you see here that they had 4 chillers located on the north side of the plant. Even the 4 chillers running at full capacity was not enough for them. So what we suggested was that upgrading their 4 chillers with new chillers, and also put a VFD on those chillers. Now, we might think that this is a straightforward solution. They just need to do it like right away. But making it applicable to a pharma company is a whole different deal, because one, you need to look at the carbon impact of the solution. You need to look at the cost of the solution, the potential impacts it can create to production, And then there is also a whole regulatory FDA compliance requirements for pharma. So we need to make sure that we are considering all the metrics when we are discussing a solution. And you can see here that we used a decarbonization tool to kind of figure out, okay, so what is the existing baseline, and then what all solutions can apply till 2050, how much % of carbon are they reducing? And then we gave them a kind of a toggle of solutions, and they can click on each solution, and it'll show them how much carbon reduction comes from each solution from now till 2050. Then once we had the viability discussion, we had to rank these based on cost, payback, and carbon. So you can see here, we've given these ranges for these solutions. So one is the carbon saving, whether it's low, medium, or high, whether it's the cost savings, low, medium, or high. And then this was the budget. So we laid out each solution based on that. Finally, we gave them our implementation roadmap. So we kind of, what was the challenge? What is the solution? And then how do they lay out the roadmap for this? What are the benefits of a particular solution? What are the indirect benefits? And then what are the financial cost results? So it was kind of like a one-pager roadmap. We also gave them an implementation timeline on when they can take the solution to design. This is the second of the case studies where we worked with a real estate property management firm. And this was a little bit different type of case study because they were looking at a portfolio of buildings and they wanted to know which of those properties would get stranded first. And so I have an example here, in Chicago, where we did a decarbonization assessment for one of the buildings. So again, as with the previous case study, this particular property manager had already gone through the mobilization phase. So they had already met with their stakeholders and they kind of knew exactly what the decarbonization goals was. So they wanted us to come in and help them implement low cost, no cost measures from retro-commissioning. And then what are the CapEx 10-year capital plan measures? What are the upgrades? How does it look like on the electrical side of things? And then compare that roadmap to the CRREM pathway, which is carbon risk real estate monitoring. And then finally, they wanted to reposition. They wanted us to look at what are the immediate measures that can be applied for repositioning. So what that means is that what are the equipment that can be immediately electrified? And how does it look like from a carbon roadmap standpoint? And this is where we did the site assessment. So we went in and looked at the lighting. We looked at the, cooling, the AV boxes, the whole deal on the office property. And then we came up with a list of solutions in terms of pointing out, okay, what is your implementation cost? What is your payback? And then they also had a tenant versus a landlord, how these measures applied. So we kind of broke them out and provided them with a clear summary picture of here's your list of identification of list of your carbon measures. And then we used a decarbonization tool to kind of figure out which of these solutions made the most sense and when do they have to be implemented. So you can see here that we have 3 or 4 parameters that we can choose on our Decarb tool. The first is the emissions with measures, emissions without measures, and then how does it compare with the CRREM line? And then the owner also had a goal for 50% reduction by 2030. So we also added that as a metric. So you can see here, it clearly shows you how the building performs till 2050, assuming that they implemented all the measures. So you can see here, there's a steep drop in the carbon emissions because they are implementing a majority of the measures. And then you can see here that the rest of the emissions are really through decarbonization of the grid. And then there are some measures that are getting implemented right at the very end. So this kind of picture is very important for a property manager to decide when exactly do they have to, implement decarbonization. Finally, I wanted to talk about LEED a little bit because LEED really has marked a turning point in sustainability, at least the latest version for the built environment. And it's very heartening to see that decarbonization is at the very heart of LEED this time because it provides a pathway for 50% of the total points to be achieved through decarbonization credits, which is incredible. So I looked through the LEED V5. There are credits for greenhouse gas reduction performance. Carbon projection is now a prerequisite. It's a big deal because right now all building owners going through LEED O+M have to know exactly how their building is performing through 2050. Strategic Decarbonization Roadmap also gets a lot of credit. Monitoring-based commissioning, again, as I said, is indicated in LEED right now, and you actually get extra points right now for monitoring-based commissioning. So it's very, very heartening to see how LEED has turned decarbonization into a core pillar. So just to summarize what we talked about, decarbonization is a journey. It's not a one-time audit solution. It's a journey. It's a roadmap. And you need a framework for that. So you need to go from Mobilize all the way to managing your building stock. So with that, I conclude. If you're interested in developing a roadmap for your building, if you're interested in talking more about how the framework looks like for your property or portfolio for property, kindly feel free to reach me. I have my contact details in there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Satish. Thank you, Samaya. It was a wonderful presentation. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. I'm Katie Klusny. I'm the Deputy Director at Illinois Green Alliance, and I'm going to be sharing a couple of other tools. As you guys both mentioned, decarbonization planning is definitely an emerging trend and an emerging tool, and a lot of folks are starting to consider that, especially with advancing policies here in Illinois. And so I'm going to share my screen quick and talk a little bit more about a project Illinois Green has been working on and walk us through that for just a second. Hopefully you guys can see my slide. Still good. Okay. So the Building Energy Hub is a project of Illinois Green Alliance, and along with a number of partners. We launched this project a couple of years ago as a way to address bringing all the best tools, resources, and guidance to existing buildings throughout Illinois. We really wanted to make sure that we are addressing this industry as well as what we do for new construction and our project teams. So really the audience for the Building Energy Hub is owners, property managers, contractors, building operators, and really creating some really great tools and resources. There's a million websites where you can find things. Samaya and Satish talked about some great resources today, but we're really trying to bring these things to our members and to the building community to curate some of the best practices out there and to so you don't have to search the whole internet. So this project is in partnership with ComEd, Elevate, a number of partners, the Illinois Climate Bank, and with support from ComEd, the U.S. Department of Energy, and local foundations. And our building advisory group did identify decarbonization planning as something that needed some more guidance as well. And so we worked on a new building performance planning guide with our friends at Slipstream that take a lot of the things that Samaya and Satish talked about and kind of meet any building owner or operator where they are in their journey. I'm going to share a little bit about that, but then I want to get to the Q&A. So just wanted to share this guide. It just launched a couple of weeks ago, and it really helps, again, owners and operators make some decisions through a journey that kind of continues. So getting to know your building, developing your decarbonization plan, and implementing that scope, and breaks this down into some clear and actionable items to figure out what you should do first, next, how to prioritize all of those items. Really looking at what are some of the key triggers and considerations over time. So not just things you're going to do right now, as Satish mentioned. There's a lot of things that are what do you need to mobilize now, but look at later some of the items that you might think about implementing over time and what those capital costs and improvements might be. We have some really great graphics. These are really small on the slide, but again, you'll get these slides afterwards. And I think my colleagues are putting some links in the chat as well. So really looking at all the different prioritization of where you're trying to work on your building and working through this guide. What the guide also does is talk a lot about what questions you should ask of someone that you're working with on this. How do you prioritize items? Who should be involved along the way? And really the key considerations as you're moving through the different parts of your decarbonization planning. We also just wanted to share some cool partner tools that are out there. Again, Samaya and Satish recommended several, and we have a list of a lot of other really cool things depending on what type of building you are. If you want to dig in further, there's a retrofit playbook for large buildings that IMT and RMI and the Building Energy Exchange has developed. ASHRAE has some great guides. Enterprise has a whole decarbonization hub for affordable housing. So just want to share some of these DOE tools along with some of our other partner tools for you to dig in to your decarbonization journey. And we also have a help desk. So if you have any questions, you can call our help desk with the Building Energy Hub, and we can connect you to really great experts in our industry that can help you navigate your journey. So I'm going to end it there and turn it back to our moderator to go into the Q&A.
Well, thanks, everyone. Thank you, Samaya. Thank you, Satish. Thank you, Katie. It was also some really great presentations. I'm really pleased with the engagement we have here on the Q&A. It looks like our speakers have been typing away. So if you have a similar thought to some of those questions, make sure you check the answer tab. I am going to go actually first to the open questions to make sure that we get to those questions. So Connor Jansen from Slipstream is asking, how are you tracking grid emission reductions over time when utilizing a decarbonization tool?
Hi, Connor. So one of the features of a tool is we have the ability to program some of the emission factors based on localized grid averages, and we are using NREL's decarbonization emission factors, and we kind of incorporate that in our analysis. So it kind of shows exactly how the building decarbonizes and how the grid decarbonizes over till 2050. So you can clearly see that, you know, wherever your building portfolio is, some of your measures can clearly be, you know, help by decarbonizing of the grid quicker. So you can achieve to your net zero goals quicker in those areas as compared to areas that where the grid doesn't decarbonize quickly. Hope that made sense.
Yeah, I think that was a good answer, great answer. We were also in the process of answering Shubra's question. Can you speak more about the stranded asset risk that is driving investment?
Yeah, so this is really coming from CRREM, as I talked about. This is carbon risk real estate monitoring. And so what that is it provides a pathway for commercial real estate to align with the Paris goals of 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees. And so what CRREM really is meant to do is basically align your building with the Paris pathway and kind of look at your portfolio of assets and look at which assets are at a risk of stranding. So CRREM provides you with a curve line for both your energy as well as your emissions. And you can track your property and look at the risk that kind of look at your property when it goes above the CRREM curve. So CRREM has a curve till 2050. So you can clearly see when your building goes above the CRREM curve, and you can point that and say, okay, my building is getting stranded right there. Let's say in 2035, now I need to do more to achieve my net zero.
Next, I'm going to go to Sarah's question. Are there any plans to scale the 5M initiative into a national state project that homeowners can implement, allowing us to measure its real impact at the national state level?
No plans as of yet. We are still kind of using this 5M initiative as a customized process. We haven't had any plans to nationalize it, but definitely does sound like a good idea. We haven't done that yet.
I also wanted to pull a question back out of the answer bucket from El Kimmelman. I liked this one, was how can, where'd it go? We could just, okay, moved up the list. All right. How can we as green building professionals push for programs like Green Star, which is currently slated for phase out? And Samaya, you had an answer about not really being attached to the label, but to the main principles. So would you mind kind of restating your answer? And I also wanted to give Satish a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, that's basically similar to what I said earlier about having the green building certifications as a framework. So you have a framework that has value in it, and you utilize that for your project. So regardless if the certification remains or not, I mean, we're all disappointed that it's leaving. And I think, I'm not sure if the commenter meant Green Star or Energy Star, but I mean, if it's being phased out, there are a lot of new certifications that are coming out or are still existing, and more or less they all serve the same purpose for the specific building type. So I always say, look at the approach, what's making more sense for your building, and you can still use that approach and use the strategies that they have and incorporate it into your project. You can still make an impact, basically, even if you don't have the label.
Yeah. Satish, did you have anything to add?
No, Sumaya hit it right on the head. And also, you're going to see more certifications like LEED, talking about decarbonization, and they're going to provide a lot of assistance in terms of developing these frameworks too. But most of these are going to rely on Energy Star, at least for the time being, in terms of pulling your data, historical data, your utility bill data, your EUI analysis, all that is going to be reliant on Energy Star.
Also wanted to make sure to announce from the chat, in case people weren't keeping an eye on that, that the Illinois Green Energy or Decarbonization Hub is available for downstate organizations. It's statewide, so it's not restricted to a particular service area. Let me see, any other questions come in? No, that looks like we got to almost I think everyone. So really appreciate all of the engagement from everyone. This was a really great talk. Thank you again to Samaya and Satish. I'll hand it over to Twyla to close us out.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks, speakers, for sharing your important information today. And thank you to our audience for participating and coming to listen. We will be sending out this recording and some follow-up details that you'll receive by the end of the week. So thank you again, everyone. Have a good day.